earned her certification as Master Naturalist from Spring Island Trust. And as many of you may know, Linda is a resident of our beloved community, Habersham. So now when you check your mail in the mailbox and you see her there, you say, "Hey, Linda." Now, Ted Panayotoff, Theodore, but I'm going to call you Ted if that's okay.
Oh, please do.
Is a retired naval officer, 8 years active duty and 20 years reserve. Ted was an armament research and development engineer from the U.S. Army for 24 years. He is a lighthouse enthusiast, researcher, author, and preservationist for the previous 30-plus years. Ted was involved in lighthouse preservation in New Jersey, Maine, and in New York and Lake Ontario. Since 2016, Ted has lived in Beaufort, and as a member of the Friends of Hunting Island State Park, he has assumed responsibility for the organization's lighthouse operations. Ted has feverishly been working at the Hunting Island Lighthouse to improve its preservation and to enhance the visitor experience, and more to come. Ted lives in Ladies Island with his lovely wife, Jo, who has joined us this evening. Will you please welcome Linda Miller and Ted Panayotoff.
Hi, neighbors. Thank you for showing up, and we appreciate it. There's so many wonderful people in the room, and I see a lot of familiar faces. Thank you. When Ennis and Jeannie Edwards reached out, I was so thrilled to be able to share with you the history of Beaufort's beloved lighthouse on Hunting Island. Before Ted and I began sharing our 3-year journey on this project, I wanted to give you a little background on our organization, Friends of Hunting Island. It was formed, this little nonprofit started, believe it or not, 36 years ago on Dataw Island. It was a few neighbors who would walk the beach at Hunting Island almost daily, similar to what we all probably do in the morning here. And they came across some sea turtles. And they were just like, whoa, what are these? What are they doing? And so they dug deep and they went in and they learned that these were loggerhead turtles, and they were nesting, and they found a home in Hunting Island. It was 36 years ago. That was the birth of our sea turtle program, which is probably the most important project that we actually do oversee for Friends of Hunting Island. I'm sure you all have heard about it. It's just wonderful. So they did some research and they thought, okay, let's get this going and let's start this organization, which they did. It's evolved into a 301c3 nonprofit organization, which we run, and our mission is to support the state park through volunteer work and provide funding to projects that would not be approved via the procurement budget of the state park. Today, FOHI raises money through membership, donations, the annual Pelican Plunge, and now this book. We are delighted to share that our 2025 mission is for the restoration of the lighthouse lens, which we will detail in the presentation. Our organization has established 7 projects, all open to volunteers, anybody that would like to join. We have a membership card over there at the desk. It's open to all volunteers to include the infamous Sea Turtle program, our newly created Shorebird Stewardship program, which was developed 3 years ago, and South Carolina Audubon Society actually declared it a critical bird sanctuary on North Beach. So it's huge to have been given that opportunity. So far the project has grown to about 40 volunteers or stewards. They have to go through a training process, but if anybody is interested, it's a wonderful thing to be involved with. The lighthouse funding, which we will get into now. The construction projects for the park. We've done a lot of work. We've built a playground over there at the Lighthouse Complex. We recently put in 2 ADA slots at the pier over on South Beach, if you know where that is, in the Nature Center. The Nature Center project was huge. That was our 2023 goal, and we completely reconstructed the Nature Center through grants and funding from Beaufort County and Beaufort City. So we're pleased that we were able to accomplish that, and it was just it was a big reach, let me tell you. I was like, let's do this, and I'm like, I don't know if we can, but we did. Crazy. Conservation awareness for the island. We've recently hired somebody, or a volunteer came through and wanted to get more involved, get us more involved in conservation and awareness of Hunting Island through the collaboration of all of our community, places like DNA, Port Royal Sound Foundation. We work really closely with them. Beaufort Land Trust, lots of different organizations, and environmental partnership with some Low Country collaborators. So if you'd like to become a member, I have that over there, but in the meantime, let's get on with the talk and take you through a history of this amazing lighthouse. I'm gonna cry. 3 years worth of work. So here we go. I'll just push through the slides. Ted is amazing. He's gonna be your historian and give you an awful lot of deep information as we go through the slides. So we have, you can look at it too. Yeah.
All right, well, basically, in the U.S., lighthouses go back to colonial times. There were about a dozen lighthouses that were constructed at various times by the colonies. The earliest lighthouse that was constructed in what was later the U.S. was up in Boston in 1716. And the oldest lighthouse that's continuously operated ever since it was constructed in New Jersey to mark the entrance to New York Harbor was the Sandy Hook Lighthouse in 1764. So that lighthouse has been working there, showing the vessels the proper way into New York Harbor ever since then. And so when we became a country, then the federal government decided to take over operation of the lighthouses because they were so important to the economy of the country. Everything, if you think about it, back in 1789, there were no railroads. What roads there were, long distance roads, were just a cart track if you were lucky. So everything had to move by water, up and down the coast, up and down rivers, across bays, along canals, that sort of thing. So it was so important, so the federal government passed a law that says we're going to take over operating and maintaining and building new lighthouses, and it's going to be part of what's called the U.S. Lighthouse Service. It was a civilian service. It was part of the Treasury Department, and then later part of the Commerce Department, and up until 1939 when it was folded into the United States Coast Guard and became a military operation. Now, one of the things that the Lighthouse Service wanted to do and were working was to set up a system of that you see on the chart here. Up in the upper right-hand corner is Charleston. Down in the lower in the lower left-hand corner is Savannah. There were the lighthouse at both of those ports. They were there since colonial times, and it was they were large lighthouses that were visible about 20 miles at least, maybe a little bit more. So those two circles are that 20-mile visibility. And there was a gap in the center there that was about 30 miles wide. So a vessel going along the coast would be in an area where they didn't have any guidance. So that was not a good thing. And ideally, you would want some sort of a light there. Well, you could get that really quickly by stationing a light ship, and you can see there's like a little ship symbol there. There was a light ship stationed at the mouth of St. Helena Sound on the St. Helena Bank lightship. But the problem with light ships was that they were labor intensive. You had a crew of about 8 personnel on a light ship, and you needed a relief crew, So you were paying salaries for about 16 people to basically function as a lighthouse. So if you could build a physical lighthouse on shore that would be staffed by 2 or usually 3 lighthouse keepers, that was in the long run much cheaper. So that was so important to, you can see up in the upper right-hand corner there, a coasting schooner there actually going by a lighthouse. I sometimes tell folks, standing on shore looking out to sea would be like standing at a rest stop on Interstate 95 and looking at the 18-wheelers going back and forth. That was the number of ships that were going back and forth like that. So let's see. Oh, okay, and that's that. So now the idea would be there's a little lighthouse symbol there, and
It's ready when you go.
the next one, now that one there.
Yeah.
That's now starting around 1855, based on information, local information about where would be the best place to put a lighthouse. This lighthouse was built on the north end of Hunting Island. It was a masonry lighthouse, basically bricks. It was hexagonal in shape. It's about 100 feet high. That was very similar to a number of other lighthouses. There are probably 6 or 8 of these still in existence, in various, along the coast in various parts of the country. So that lighthouse actually went into operation with a staff of 3 lighthouse keepers in June of 1859. But what happened in 1861 just up the coast in Charleston?
Drama.
What happened? Anybody know? That was exactly Fort Sumter, the beginning of the Civil War, and the people in the various states along the coast down in what became then the Confederate states said, well, we don't have a navy. Who's going to benefit from all these lighthouses that are along our coast? Not us. The Union Navy's going to benefit. There were all these big things in the newspapers up north. There was going to be this Anaconda plan that was going to strangle the Confederate states by blockading the coast. And they said, well, those are the guys that are going to benefit from these lighthouses. So the first thing they did, they removed all the equipment from that lighthouse. They shut it down in about 2 weeks after Fort Sumter, and they moved all that stuff to the, everybody know where the Arsenal is downtown? In Beaufort? They moved it all there. They said, okay, that's a safe place for it, and then just to be absolutely sure, they set off explosives in the base of the lighthouse and destroyed it. So now, when the Union Navy took over Port Royal Sound in November of 1861, there was no lighthouse there. And eventually they built down in the little corner there, they built a small lighthouse on St. Philip's Island. And that was in existence from 1863 to 1869. So that served, because the Union Navy had a base in Port Royal Sound, that was where all the ships that were blockading the southern coast in this area were based. So, all right. So this was the information here.
I just want to make
Sure.
an add-on. The plates that you see here, they are original from the Library of Congress, and we were the first people that ever was able to get our hands on them, and they're all published in that book. So these are from, this plate right here is 1859, I believe. Original architect drawing. And you'll see that in a couple of chapters away.
We've got the drawings. You want to build another one of those? full size too. They're originally probably about 3 foot by 4 foot drawings, so we have them on computer things. But anyway,
You should start selling them.
okay.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
All right, so this is now, after the end of the Civil War in 1865, the Lighthouse organization up in Washington said, okay, we gotta put this whole system back together now, because virtually every lighthouse was put out of commission in one way or the other. And so this lighthouse, in 1873, they decided that a lighthouse on Hunting Island would be, we want to replace the original one, and they drew up the plans. Now, there was one little hitch in the thing, that the appropriation that was originally passed by Congress in 1873 to build this lighthouse had a little thing down in the fine print that said, you gotta build it on federal property. So they were gonna save a few bucks. And so the problem was that the north end of Hunting Island was eroding away very seriously, and the Lighthouse Service knew that. They could look at charts and see. So they said, we better have a plan B. We better have the person that designs the lighthouse design it so we can take it apart and move it if we have to. And that's what was done. The two gentlemen over on the right there, Major George Elliott and Mr. Phelps, were the designers of the lighthouse. Major, because he was in the Army Corps of Engineers, which was at that time responsible for the design, construction, and maintenance of the lighthouse structures. So he was the one that took care of that. The drawing there is the drawing of the base of the lighthouse. That's up the little stairs you can see coming in from the right there. There were tanks of fuel around the base there, 6 100-gallon tanks, and they held the fuel for the lighthouse, which at that time was lard. And that was a good fuel. It worked very well, especially down here when you get up in Maine where I used to live, and it gets down to 10 degrees below zero. The lard gets a little difficult to work with. That fuel was fine. And of course, it's a natural substance. It doesn't have any volatile fumes. It's fine to store it there. Okay. All right. This is.
I'm gonna go back to there.
All right. So this is a photograph that was taken in the early 1880s of the original the lighthouse at its original location. And that is the keeper's dwelling, as it was called, keeper's house. You're looking at the front of the house. It was a duplex that was shared by 3 families. Our assumption is that one half of the duplex was where the guy in charge, the keeper, lived, and then the 2 assistant keepers and their families worked out some sort of a sharing arrangement of the other half. And if you can see up in the attic there are some windows up there, and there's a stairway that goes up there, so there was some extra living space there.
You know what, I think this is a good time to share that the keeper's house had burned down.
Yes.
Because you don't see this at Hunting Island now, but you see the architectural renderings of it, of where they scoped it out, and just, you've got a good
Okay,
location.
that's a good point. Well, I mean, actually, the keeper's house was moved when the lighthouse was moved. Back to the thing, plan B, we better be able to take it apart and move it. Well, they had to do that over the winter of 1888, 1889. And then they took the keeper's house apart and they moved it. That was fairly easy because the house was prefabricated. It was made actually up in Charleston, brought down here in pieces. the lighthouse service was pretty modern. You think prefabricated houses or something real modern and new. They were doing that back in the late 1800s. But anyway, what happened though later on, after the move, there was a fire after in the 1930s, and it burned. Well, the keeper's house was severely damaged and couldn't be reused. And then it was torn down, and then just recently, well, generally recently, probably since 2000, archaeological work was done to find where the original foundation was, and then some new bricks were put there to sort of outline, so you can kind of see, where the different rooms were.
History has it that they were playing bridge, the keepers, and then apparently, Hurricane Lantern went up in smoke, and that was that. So there's a lot of drama behind this lighthouse that we'll get into. Sorry.
That's just a quick diagram there of the move situation. You can see the red on the upper left-hand there. That was the extent of the island about 1867 when they first started thinking about this, and then that was the property that was owned by the federal government. That red section was about 300 and something acres, and then where the lighthouse was located, when they finally said, we gotta move it, it was practically on the edge of the beach. You can see there where it was located. And then what they did was, the federal government bought a parcel of land further down on the island that was 138 acres or something like that. And the lighthouse was moved. They said, okay, we learned our lesson. We're going to put it right in the middle of the island on the very highest spot. And that's what they did. And it was at that time about a half a mile from the beach and about a half a mile from the creek on the other side of the island. Now it's only maybe 200 yards from the beach. So that erosion is still going on. On the side of Johnson Creek, there was also a boathouse and a pier, everything. That was how the supplies came into to the light station, the fuel for the light and various things, and a tram car, something like that one. That's there, sort of a reconstruction of one, and that was how those supplies got to up to the light station. Now, what happened was as part of the move, you had to, as that little photograph at the bottom there shows, you had to dismantle the lighthouse. The lighthouse was made out of cast iron plates, so it could be taken apart. They were all bolted together. You had to unbolt it, take it all apart, and then rebuild it. Now, unfortunately, there was nobody around with a camera to take pictures, but this is the lighthouse at the entrance to Chesapeake Bay, and it was constructed somewhat the same way, and there is a picture of that. And you can see a derrick in the center where they hoisted these plates up. There's over on the right-hand edge of that is a steam boiler and a steam winch, and then down a little bit below that, you can see a tram car and a couple of guys there. So that's some of the same type of equipment. So now the thing that we've talked about now is kind of the bricks and mortar stuff, but the real soul of the system, what I call, was the guys that wore this uniform, the lighthouse keepers. Now originally they didn't have a uniform, but starting in the early 1880s, this was the lighthouse keepers uniform. Now this is one of the buildings that we have in an exhibit, part of an exhibit in that building. And the three people there, the gentleman sitting in the chair and the two younger gentlemen to his right there, are his sons, and they were all lighthouse keepers. Not shown in the photograph are actually two other people in that family. One is the gentleman sitting down, whose name was Svensson, Halvar Svensson. His wife, Louisa, is actually a native of Beaufort. Exactly how they met and got married, we haven't figured that out yet. But anyway, those were two sons. In fact, there was a large family. There was about another 3 or 4 people in that family. And then he fell with his hands in his pockets, who was a lighthouse keeper down in Georgia. And, eventually that was where he ended up. His son was actually a lighthouse keeper at his lighthouse for a while. And so in that family, there were 3 generations of lighthouse keepers. The other fellow there in the picture is a lighthouse keeper, and he's wearing the summer uniform, which were authorized. The only thing is, the lighthouse service didn't help you put a little bit of money to buy a uniform. If you wanted a summer lightweight uniform, you had to buy it yourself. But these are, I said, the soul of the system. Frederick there, he's wearing basically the same uniform I have. He's got his K up here on his collar tab, which means he was the keeper. But I really like George Jackson there. Obviously, we only wore this uniform. The keepers only wore the uniforms, the full uniform for special occasions when the boss was coming to inspect or something. But, George Jackson there smoking a pipe with probably an old hat and work clothes. If you just happen to drop in, that's where you'd find it. Okay, some of the interesting things that occurred out there at the island. One of them was the Great Sea Island Storm of 1893. The ship, the SS City of Savannah, was coming from Boston down to Savannah, got caught in this really bad hurricane. Those days, there wasn't a lot of predicting capability and everything. They ran into the storm off of Charleston. It knocked out the engine, and fortunately, at that time, the ship was built in the 1870s. At that time, they also had sails. The captain was able to use the sails ashore right off the north end of Hunting Island with the idea that at least maybe we could save all the people on board. And in fact, they did over a period of a couple of days, but no lives were lost.
This was one of my favorite chapters to work on, by the way, because it was so incredible how many people we lost on St. Helena Island. They had no ability to telegraph that there was a storm coming, and the only thing they could do was raise a red flag. And by the way, nobody really had an automobile or any way of knowing what was happening, and that was scary times. And consider where we are nowadays, right? We're overwhelmed by GPS and information and alerts and whatnot. But these poor people, and I forget how many people we lost.
They don't even know for sure because there weren't good, census in the islands, especially the Gullah people on the islands. And they think it was somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people lost their lives. I mean, whole families just disappeared.
Which is the birth of Clara Barton of the Red Cross.
Yes.
She was living down here, and so she came in, and this was the birth of her job to the founder of the Red Cross. And go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, what she did was, she had served in, as a nurse, really, during the Civil War, and had formed this organization. But this was the first time that they actually did a situation where they came in and took over and attended to a natural disaster like that, which now, we know, I mean, that's their main function, sort of, the Red Cross, is to come in and help people with natural disaster. And this was kind of the model for that she organizes, and she was here, in the Low Country for, more than 6 months or so, getting this thing going.
Downtown Beaufort, they have an awful lot about her. I believe there's a monument down there too for her, but she executed all the shipping and bringing in the supplies and whatnot. But she was just a stellar person to be there at that time. Okay, sorry about that.
This is after, the lighthouse was moved, and after the hurricane, they dated the photograph of, said to be 1894. The interesting thing, I don't know if you can, oh yeah, it's a little light there, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a whole bunch of ladders on the roof of the house. And I'm thinking, oh, well, they were fixing, you know, they probably lost a lot of shingles in the hurricane, so there were people up there fixing. The other little interesting thing on that picture is between the lighthouse tower and the keeper's house, there's that little building there, and that is called the oil house. And that, you'll see that now out there. If you've been out to the lighthouse, it's just down, just there, almost next to the lighthouse. The lighthouse service was in the process just in the 1888, 1889 timeframe, in that timeframe, from changing from the lard oil fuel to what was called mineral oil, but what we call kerosene today. How many people have had kerosene lamps and that sort of thing? Okay, you know, it has volatile petroleum fuels. And you couldn't store 600 gallons of kerosene in the base of a lighthouse and have a lighthouse for too long, because that fumes would go up through the lighthouse, and pretty soon you'd have a explosive mixture up at the top of the lighthouse. So there was a crash program to build these oil houses. There were small buildings, they were always fireproof, made out of bricks or stone with slate roofs, and that was where the fuel for the lighthouse was stored. Now, everything went along great. The lighthouse played a very interesting role that we won't go into during the Great War in 1917, 1918. But then 1933, what was going on in the country then?
Depression.
Yes, depression. All government agencies were given the word, do the best you can to cut back on expenses. And all over the country, not just here, the lighthouse service decommissioned lighthouses. They replaced them where they could with things like buoys or just an unmanned structure, or they shut them down completely if they figured they weren't needed anymore. So here at Hunting Island, you can see where it points to where the lighthouse was, and out in about 4 miles from shore and about 6 miles from the lighthouse, they put in a large buoy. Now, if you look at the picture, that's not a picture of the actual one, but one of that same size. I mean, that buoy is like 20 feet high, and it had a light on it, and operated by tanks of settling gas that were down there. So now all the maintenance that had to be done was to replace that settling gas on a regular basis every 6 months. So when the lighthouse closed down, equipment was removed, and the property there was turned over to the Beaufort County. Again, most likely because of the fact that it was a depression, they didn't have a lot of money to do anything with it, so they passed it on to the state. The state was able to acquire the rest of the island, and so they started then building a state park there. And the work was being done by the Civilian Construction Corporation, and this was a organization that was set up by FDR when he came in 1933 to do two things: to do projects, but also to employ young men, groups of young men. And there was a camp set up on the island and, people from the Department of Agriculture and the Department of the Interior, supervised the work, and they did projects with the Lighthouse. So one of the things they did was build causeways, and, it was rough work. There wasn't much, there's one sort of a dump trucky kind of thing there, but most of it was just hand labor with picks and shovels. And then, when the causeways built, then, bridges were built, the swing bridge. Has anybody gone out to Hunting Island, back when the spring bridge was there? You go like that. Yeah. But anyway, the swing bridge was built, and then the other bridge over Johnson Creek. Okay, and then, the state park opened up in, early 1941, but then after Pearl Harbor, fairly soon it closed, for the duration of the war. And there's a picture of the swing bridge there. And then, after,
Isn't that beautiful? I had to hunt that down. That's a Charleston photographer. And she did that, she took that shot in a drone, in a plane. And she was hanging out with her camera, literally. She's amazing, and it's in the book, and I love this photo. Right before it was taken down.
yeah, it's sort of sad in a way. I mean, that they took it down, because there was something magic about those bridges. Listen, we still have one in Beaufort. In fact, I had to go around because it was stuck or something. So anyway, so there, some of the things, the lighthouse was on the National Register of Historic Places in the 1970s. There was also another, thing somewhat similar to that called the Habs Historic American Building Survey that was done in the 1980s, which, went into a bunch of programs and made more drawings of the lighthouse, which was very useful. Anyway, okay.
Which brings us into the 21st century, which is where we all are at this moment. I don't know if you know about the movie, what's it called? What's the movie? Netflix.
Outer Banks.
Outer Banks, thank you.
TV
Sorry.
series,
Yeah, so they do a lot of filming for Hunting Island, or for that program here, and then it's a good picture of the lighthouse there. But the closure, we just experienced a big closure in 2022, which I'm sure everybody knows, you can't walk it now, and it's taking a lot of time to get, all the approvals in, but we're good. We've got scaffolding. This is a recent picture. I think this was taken about three months ago. So the intended opening, it was just a lot of wear and tear on the steps. The steps are huge. It's the only lighthouse in South Carolina that you can actually climb, 167 steps. That's why it's so popular. And so they wanted to make sure that obviously it was all in good form and so forth, so we didn't have any issues. And the state came in and they're paid, I think they're spending about $10 million on this project.
I don't know, it's in the millions.
It's growing.
It took a while, for the program to be laid out, and then the state park folks had to go to the legislature and get the money set aside. This wasn't just a minor fix it up thing. This was a real thing. And what I could point out is that when we're back talking about the keepers, oftentimes tell people the keepers only spend about 10% of their time operating the lighthouse and making it run. The other 90% of the time, they were maintaining all that stuff, the lighthouse itself and all the other buildings and everything. So once that was closed, once the lighthouse service decommissioned the light and reassigned the lighthouse keepers, there was nobody maintaining anything. And that lighthouse is made out of iron and steel, and the ocean is not too far away. And so you can imagine there's the rust and things that build up over the years and over the years. And eventually, it really just got to a point where we just got to start right from the beginning. So that project is going to take a year and a half. So we're about less than a half a year into it. And so it's going to be a year from now or a little bit more before that'll be there. But I think it'll be around for many more years after that.
So we inherited a great opportunity to work on a new project after we built the Nature Center, and that is the restoration of the Fresnel lens. And the Fresnel lens has been you can go into more detail on that.
Okay. Well, this lens actually is, in a sense, was never in the lighthouse for operational purposes. This lens was actually in the original Charleston Lighthouse up marking the entrance of Charleston Harbor. This is the largest lens, standard lens that was made. It's called a first order lens. You can see, the guy standing next to it is about 6.5 feet in diameter and about 12 feet high. So that lens, unfortunately, had to be removed from that lighthouse because, again, the beach erosion problem. The beach erosion got so bad that they couldn't even keep the lighthouse keepers' houses there. So they said, well, we've got to put a much smaller light there, take that lens out, and then we can automate that light so we don't have a keeper out there that doesn't want any place to live. And so that's what they did, and they put this in storage in Charleston. Then in 1962, the Coast Guard said, well, all it's doing is just taking up space in our storeroom here. Let's see if we can get rid of it. And the state park system got it all, and it was turned over to South Carolina, the Parks, Recreation, Tourism Department. And so that was put in the lighthouse, down in the base of the lighthouse, on exhibit. And then the issue came up, well, now they're going to have a great big construction project here. This thing is made out of glass. We don't want some guy dropping a wrench from way up in the top of the lighthouse and hitting this thing and smashing it all to pieces. So we said, okay, let's take it out of there, put it in storage, do some repairs to it as much as we can do, and then build another. First we made the mistake by calling it a building, and they said, oh, well, no, you don't want a building, because now you get into code, and you gotta have a sprinkler system and all that stuff. So we're gonna have an enclosure. It's basically gonna be sort of a copy of the top of the lighthouse, and it's gonna be on the ground. It's gonna be right next to the base of the lighthouse, and it'll be, if you're ADA requirement, you'll be able to go around and see it. And also, extremely important, it's going to have climate control. Not that we worry about the temperature, but what the problem is the dust. The dust gets on the lens, and it attracts the moisture from the air, which now has chemicals because the ocean is just a couple hundred yards away. And that sits on the lens, and eventually those chemicals will etch the glass. And so that was why the lighthouse keepers clean those lenses on a daily basis. Well, we can't do that. But we can close the building, we can have an HVAC system there that will keep that lens good.
The picture on the right is from Nantucket, and we found that to be the perfect solution to house the Fresnel lens, which is about the same size as the one that they have up there. So it's pretty cool to bring Nantucket-ish to down here. And that would be it.
But first I want to say thank you so much. That was so informative and really very, very interesting. I'm going to leave this right here for you. And Ted, would you like to sit down?
Okay, I'll do that.
And have a seat. Unfortunately, we only have one microphone, but.
Can everybody
your hand and ask away.
So I want to know how you two met and how you decided to work together to write this book. I mean, I discovered you, by the way, because I think we go to the same dentist. And I saw the book at the dentist, and I'm like, oh, you know, this is cool. And I started looking at it, and I'm like, she's my neighbor.
Oh, yes.
So, anyway, so tell us how this all began.
Want to take that?
Sure, I can hear, I moved to Habersham in 2018, and as I said, I had a very big corporate life behind me, and was happy to get out of that and come here, and I thought it was just gonna be to hang out. My mom was still living in Charleston, I was taking care of her, and my dad is buried at Beaufort National, so I've got a lot of roots here. And as it turned out, I loved Habersham, I couldn't believe it, my head is on a swivel every day. I love it so much. And then I went down to the lighthouse. I remember when I first drove here, I went down through St. Helena, and I just was blown away by the location. I thought, oh my gosh. And then I got to Hunting Island, and I was like, I will do anything for this island. It's just so special. It felt really, really, it was a very special moment for me in my life. And I always loved lighthouses. I was a lighthouse junkie, not like him. He totally beats me on that. And then I said, if I can ever do anything for Hunting Island, I would. Well, it turns out Kate Hudson, your neighbor,
Yes.
was working for Friends of Hunting Island. And I said, Kate, and they took me to a party down at Tabby's place. And it was a dinner for the sea turtle program. And I came in there, and I went to a sea turtle hatching. So I got familiar with that, and I just fell in love with it. And I said, what can I do? Kate then got me involved, and I got on the board. And from that point forward, I've been there 6 years. Ted, you were there before me.
Yes. Well, actually, my wife was over in the corner there. We started coming down to Beaufort in 2014. We were living up in upstate New York, Oswego, New York. We just got a picture from our daughter in their front yard. They had to dig out their mailbox so the mailman could put the mail in it. We had so much snow. But anyway, so we started coming down here just for a month. And then after several years of doing that, we looked at each other and said, this is silly, why don't we just move down here? And so we moved down, and we found a place over on Ladies Island, and we were here in 2000. We moved here in 2016. I've had a real interest in lighthouses that goes all the way back to the mid-1980s, and we were involved in lighthouses in New Jersey, and then we lived in Maine for 15 years, where I was involved with lighthouses there, and then up in upstate New York on Lake Ontario, the lighthouse there. So it was just natural that, I mean, I had seen the lighthouse, actually. In fact, I even visited the lighthouse back in 1996. I've got pictures of it. We had done a trip down here when we lived in Maine to visit lighthouses along the East Coast. But anyway, so, you know, and next thing I knew, they said, okay, you're in charge of the lighthouse committee, and just been working on it and just enjoy it and enjoy researching it, and then the opportunity to do this book came along, and in fact, I mean, I'm still working on it, really. they have to grab it away from me and say, okay, that's it, we gotta get this in the publishing.
Number 2.
So here's my other question.
Sure.
Have you ever written a book before? Because looking through it, it is so well put together. It's just so well done. Are
No.
you experienced authors?
You have to thank Linda for that.
He provided a lot of substance, but I'm so into art and architecture and all of that. And this project, when it came on my desk, Lydia Inglet is the publisher. If anybody knows Lydia on Hilton Head Island, she does all the really beautiful books. So we got the opportunity to work with her, and it was just such a It was a little bit, started during COVID too, so this was like my best job ever. Just sit there and go through the plates and the designs and the architecture and the history. And he and I worked together through email, literally. We never even met because it was just so much information. And so we were able to work through Dropbox, and the publisher got the information. So it was an amazing, and the layout, if you see the book, was such a visual. And I just tried to bring in the history, which is what Ted's real strength is. But I wanted to create a story about all the drama that's really gone on that island. There's so much there, and all the little vignettes and the stories. We have there's a story in there of a woman who was in New York City, who was, the lightkeeper died, I forget her name, his name, and on his deathbed, he said to his wife, "Mind the light, Katie," right? So she had 3 children, and I think the lighthouse was on Staten Island.
No, it was out in New York Harbor.
Harbor.
And she had to row the kids in
To school,
to
and pick them up.
to New Jersey, to, I forget the name of the town now, to get them, so they could get the school bus.
This is like in the 1930s, and this is just so amazing to me, like, the dedication that these people have for keeping the light. And his nice words to her, "Mind the light, Katie." I mean, it was a kid. So all of these stories I had to just throw in there because it just gave you so much information about all of the different, the hard job that keepers do, the storm, the great storm was amazing to work with that. I got a lot of photos from, obviously the library in Beaufort, and a lot of information through them, but it was just so cool to dig through all of that and put it together.
See, my problem is, my background is engineering. And once you put an engineer to work on a problem, he doesn't want to quit. And
How many
if it
emails
wasn't
do
for
we go
her,
through, Joe?
I'd still be working, we'd still be working on the book. And to tell you the truth, today, I was in town and I was debating with myself to stop by the, what's in the school? No, technical college of Low Country.
Tech, yeah, Low Country.
Yeah, and, because I have a question for somebody there. And I said, "Oh, I wonder if they're there, maybe I'll stop by." She was over at the library doing something, and I had to go pick her up. I said, "Well, maybe another time." I haven't put the book aside, but I have written, that's the 4th lighthouse-related book that I've done.
It was a fun collaboration, I gotta tell you.
Yes.
I'm a lighthouse person myself, and then listening to you talk, I went to school in Oswego, so I knew that.
Oh, my goodness.
I knew that lighthouse up there.
Oh.
All my family's from,
Oswego?
yeah, I'm a Oswego grad.
All right.
All my family's from Maine, so I know many of the lighthouses along the coast of Maine.
Yes.
But my favorite, I'm from Long Island, is Montauk Point Lighthouse, commissioned by George Washington. I wonder if you've ever been to that one.
I have, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I took the kids there when they were little. That was our favorite spot whenever we were out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite a lighthouse, and they had to move it also. And I got to watch that about 10, 15 years ago. But they didn't take it apart, they raised it.
Oh, yeah. Well, now you have the technology to do that.
Back then, yeah.
In 1888, 89, there was no technology to do that.
Right.
Yes.
So, lighthouses are basically the same shape all over the world, correct?
Well,
just
not
general?
Not really. They're very.
My question is does the way this light is put on the top, is the shape of it dictated? How did they get the light on the top of the lighthouse?
Well, they built the lighthouse. At the top, typically, they had a Fresnel lens that could have been as large or small as it was needed. In other words, you put the lighthouse in a particular position to serve a purpose. Now, lighthouses came kind of in two general sizes. Seacoast lights, which were like Hunting Island, a tall structure, because not only does the light have to have power so that the rays go out, but it has to be high enough, so otherwise the earth is round, you know, you're gonna be over here. You know, it's gonna be behind the curvature of the earth, so you have to have it tall. Now, some cases, maybe you look out and there's a big high bluff there or something, you don't need that. But, so that's the thing, and then the light up there, typically up until the 1930s, they were all oil burning lamps. Then eventually they started to switch to electricity. But typically lighthouses are out in the middle of nowhere. You didn't have, you know, your light system like you have today, you know, your power lines and everything like that. You had to make your own electricity out of the light. And that wasn't as reliable. And in fact, there were lighthouse keepers up in Maine that said, man, I don't want anything to do with that newfangled electricity stuff. This light, as long as I'm working here, it's gonna have an oil lamp. And finally, those guys finally retired, like in the 1960s, I went, okay, now we can put electric lights. Get rid of these.
So it wasn't mirror, it was just a light, a lamp.
Correct.
So it wasn't mirrors that magnified the light.
Well, the Fresnel lens does the magnification. So, like,
Through prisms.
yeah,
Right.
prisms
That's what I
and the design of, this was the gentleman, Augustin Fresnel, that's where the name comes from. He was a physicist that worked for the French lighthouse system, lighthouse organization in the early 1800s. And he, well, we would call him a physicist today, he sat down and worked out all the math to be able to design those prisms so they would capture the light and focus it in one direction or just focus it in a horizontal direction. And a well-designed lens that was put together properly and everything all fit right would capture about 80% of the light that was put out by the lamp. And then the lamp could have multiple wicks if it was a wick lamp, and then eventually, talk about, well, in Hunting Island in 1904, it switched over to what was called an incandescent oil vapor lamp. Does anybody here have a Coleman camping lantern? Your mantle on your camping lantern's about that big. Imagine a mantle about this big. 240,000 candle power when you get that going. And it took a little bit of work. It took about a half an hour to get it up and running. But once you got that lamp going with a mantle that big, it really put out the light.
So it was hoisted up through the center of the.
Well,
Then how
typically
did they
no.
get it up there?
The
That's
light was
back
up at
then.
the top. The lighthouse keeper had to go up there and carry the fuel up every morning. The keeper that was on duty at the end of the evening, the regulation said the light could be turned off at half an hour after sunrise. And then his job was to get everything ready for the oncoming night. And once it was all set, then he was done, he could go get breakfast.
I think you're asking how they got that big head lens up there, is that what you're asking?
That's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
figure
how
That was, it all came apart.
Okay.
That's what we did with the one that was on there. We had a gentleman who is semi-retired, he's called a lampist. That was the title that was the technician.
It's like the only lampist in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Not a big deal.
He's,
so we had,
yeah, he works, he lives out in Arizona, and he has a
That's
bunch of
true.
guys. that
How many
work
miles
all over the country. And he and two guys from New Jersey came down here, they spent about 4 days, and they took that lens apart, and they, packaged it in crates. We kind of looked, and were the gophers, you know, and helped maybe make a few, helped a little bit on cutting the lumber for the crates.
that was our construction team, they did that, they made the crates literally for every prism that would come off of that lens and put it into this, then we put it in a storage, we have it over on Ladies Island, by the airport.
Storage.
So getting it back up there, you don't have to climb the stairs.
No,
Is there a
take it by
pulley or
pieces,
something?
yeah.
Yeah, and that was how it was put together. Now, in our case, we're not gonna, you know, we're not gonna put it on the White House, we're gonna put it down
Right.
in this,
Thank
in this
goodness.
reproduction sort of the top of the
Right.
White House is gonna.
But that's what they originally did, is pulley it up.
They took it up piece at a time, put it all together,
Cool.
and,
A lot of work.
it was a lot of work, yeah. Let's see, what do you do?
Are lighthouses in operation today?
Yes, yes,
Are there very many?
yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, there, I would guess off the top of my head, probably somewhere between 400 and 600.
No, wow.
The Coast Guard is still, the Coast Guard is responsible for them now. They have what they call aid to navigation teams. There's no, lighthouses with resident keepers. The last resident keeper, left a lighthouse in about the mid-1990s. But, so now these aid to navigation teams, there's one up in Charleston, there's one down in Savannah, and they cover the lighthouses. Now, in addition to that, they're what they call private aids. And the lighthouse at Hunting Island is a private aid. Right now, it's probably shut off because they got all that scaffolding and everything around it. The Coast Guard has to authorize a private aid. You gotta fill out a bunch of paperwork. And that was done back in 1995, and the copies of that are in the office out at Hunting Island. And the Coast Guard says, yes, you can put a light pack up there. And so there's a small light, it's not a big lens or anything like that anymore, though there are some that are still like that. It's a little, thing that works, it's an LED-based system, and in fact, you can talk to it with it looks like a TV remote. There's a little computer in there, and you point the TV remote like you do at your TV, and punch. It's all numbers. You punch numbers, and then
Yeah, question.
I associate lighthouses with foghorns.
yes.
Is that an association which is standard practice, never, what's the situation there?
Well, a lot of lighthouses, especially, a lot of them do have fog signals. Hunting Island never did at any time, but they do. And, the early fog signals were bells. And,
That someone rang manually?
somebody, initially, that's how it worked. The lighthouse keeper would hear maybe a foghorn on a ship, and he would
Yeah.
come out there
Best
and ring the
sound
bell
ever.
like that.
The best sound ever.
Yeah, and then, somebody came up with the idea that, of course, that didn't tell you where you were, because when you ring the bell, it sounds like anywhere. But then they had a system so you could ring the bell in a pattern, like every 10 seconds it would go ring, 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 or
And you know
whatever.
that was
And then they would know. So then the bells worked, the lighthouse, in fact, I've got a big book at home where they did a lot of experiments, and how far away can you really hear a bell reliably? Well, they figured it was about a mile. And then, so real powerful, foghorn on a seacoast light, they first went to a steam whistle, like a factory that would sound. The only problem was you had to make steam. And sometimes, like up in Maine, boy, you can have fog for 2 or 3 days. So 2 or 3 days, somebody's got to shovel coal to make steam. So that
And it's
was,
gotta go 24 hours a day,
that's right.
not just at night.
And then they went from steam to compressed air, and they had a engine that ran a compressor and did compressed air, and that's like when you think of foghorn, you go, ooh, that's
And do they exist in Savannah and in Charleston?
You never know.
The foghorns with the lighthouses?
they may well, I'd have to look and see
Okay.
if they.
Your
Yeah.
question now.
Several of us, some are in Maine, so we're interested in which lighthouses you work with up there and, or just visited, and whether there's some special features. And you talked about fog being one of them. Are there other things that you know about
Well,
in Maine?
in Maine, well, okay, my wife and I lived in Camden, you know, it's about halfway up the it's in Penobscot Bay, and there's a lighthouse there, called Curtis Island Light. I had some association with that, but then the main lighthouse I worked with was the Rockland Breakwater Lighthouse. It was out on the end of the breakwall, and there was an organization. Now that was a situation. You get me started on these things. There was a program in Maine that I was very much involved in. It was called the Maine Lights Program. And the lighthouse, the Coast Guard then said, we will turn over to various other entities up to, I think they identified about half the lighthouses in Maine, about 30 or so. We will turn them over to somebody else. We just aren't staffed and don't have the funding to really maintain these, but there are all kinds of organizations out there that would love to do that. So they passed these lighthouses on, just in Maine, to the national parks, state parks, state organizations, cities, and some private nonprofit groups. And it worked out very well. It ran for 2 years. In fact, former President George W. Bush was a guy who handed out we had a big to-do, and he came up when your name was called, and he handed you the paperwork for the lighthouse. And in fact, the program worked so well that then they did it on a national scale. It's called the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. Was passed in 2000. And nowadays, the Coast Guard identifies about a dozen lighthouses, give or take, each year, and they go through that process. And one thing that was a little different was if nobody wants them, then they put them up for sale. I say on eBay, but it's not really eBay.
Next.
The outside patterns on the lighthouses, the painting, black stripes, curls, don't they mean something?
Absolutely. That's called a day mark. See, the whole problem is that just seeing the lighthouse is only half the problem. The problem is which lighthouse that is that lighthouse. And if you make a mistake, it's going to ruin your day or your night very, very quickly. And so in the daytime, the lighthouses are all painted with what's called a day mark. And in fact, if you look at the little model and you look at the book there, the top third of Hunting Island Lighthouse is painted black, and the bottom 2/3 is white. That's the day mark. And if you look in a book, it's called a light list, which tells you about all the lighthouses, and if you're a competent mariner, you should be carrying one of those on your vessel. It'll tell you, okay, that's what the day mark is. But of course, at nighttime, you can't see that. So at nighttime, the light has a characteristic The characteristic of Hunting Island light is 1 4.5-second flash every 30 seconds. So you can identify that light. You said, okay, that light is flashing every 4.5 seconds, every 30 seconds. Now I know for sure that's Hunting Island. You can look, now that information is right on the chart. You can look at the chart and say, okay, I don't know what I am. It's fine, yes.
Oh, by the way, you said a couple times you're not finished with the book. Some poet at some point said, you don't finish a poem, you abandon it. So that's what you've done. And my question was, I'm glad you brought up the flashing, which is essentially the nighttime signature of the lighthouse,
Yes.
of a lighthouse. How did they achieve that kind of precision in the days, before electrical, components and that sort of thing?
Yes, okay. Of course, obviously, these are oil lamps. You obviously couldn't turn an oil lamp on and off turn it on for 4.5 seconds, turn it off for 25.5 seconds. So what the way the flash was generated was by designing the lens with a series of what we call bullseyes. A bullseye would gather from the section of the lens, would pull all that light into a narrow beam. And the width of that, the way that was designed, determined the width of the beam. And so now, when you rotated that lens, that beam was going around in a circle, and when you were looking, it looked like the light flashed. But of course, it really wasn't. It was just the beam going by. And so, how you designed the lens, which could be designed very, very precisely, and how you rotate it. Of course, it's all electricity. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to use a weight-driven motor like a big cuckoo clock. Now, we're talking about a big weight. At Hunting Island, it was 270 pounds. And the lighthouse keeper, the weight was on a long cable, went up to the top of the lighthouse. The lighthouse keeper on duty would wind this clockwork motor up, and it had a very, very accurate, thing to make sure it rotated exactly at the right speed. He had a stopwatch, and he would check that to make sure he didn't have to take some little adjustments and everything to keep it properly. And that was one of the main reasons he was up there, was to make sure the light was lit and to make sure that motor was running properly.
No problem in a power outage either. No problem in a power outage either.
Oh, that's absolutely correct, yeah. I mean, there wasn't power out at Hunting Island until probably 1941 or so. Yes.
Who determines what light signature each lighthouse has?
Okay, well, that would be nowadays the Coast Guard.
Right.
And basically, I mean, obviously, there might be a lighthouse in Texas or something that might have the same signature. And if you don't know whether you're off the coast of South Carolina, you got a real problem. It's just the same thing with the day bars. They just want to make sure that it can't be mixed up with another lighthouse nearby, or near enough so it would be a problem. But the Coast Guard does. That's why when you have a private aid, that's why you've got to go through the Coast Guard, and they figure all that out, and they say, okay, yeah, it's all right. You can shine a light and have it. In fact, our private aid now is 4.5 seconds every 30 seconds.
All right, we,
What?
want to
Can I
make
ask one
sure
question?
that, any other questions, one last question?
And this is a practical question, as most of us probably know, Hunting Island is quickly eroding into the ocean. Even since we moved here, and just 7 or 8 years ago on the southern end, it was what I thought was a mirage out in the ocean, and it was actually one of the cabins from the state park. And that's sort of the southern end, but it's rapidly, I don't know what the northern end, it's only 200 yards.
It's a constant fight.
I didn't know, I mean, you can't fight the ocean, you can't keep it back.
that's
that.
not a
They
complete
do that up and down
solution,
the coast.
because now, they're having some problems. They made all new sand dunes, and now you have a real bad hurricane. But, the good thing is, there's another Hunting Island being formed about 4 or 5 miles out.
Call it Little Hunting Island.
Maybe the trip out.
I mean, that was what a barrier island was supposed to do. Its function, really, natural function was to provide the barrier, to save the land, inside, and it eventually gives up itself to do that job.
Ted is our own AI person. So anybody that needs has any questions, I'll give you his email.
I wanna say this was a real treat. Sally, would you be kind enough about that? Just,
Well, first of all, Ted and Lynn, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your immense knowledge and passion. I learned so much, and more importantly, thank you for your commitment to Hunting Island. I mean, obviously, we all feel it's a special gym, but they're lucky to have both of you. So thank you very much. There's 2 more coming up later on this year, so keep ready for it. And if